This is D-Rig with another 5-minute how-to video. Today I'm going to show you how I solder. I need to make a connector with an XT60 female end and an XT30 male end. I've got everything prepared. I've got my solder with lead, the good stuff. I've got my flux paste. I've got my soldering iron with a wet sponge at 650 degrees Fahrenheit and a chisel tip. I've got my 16 gauge wire stripped and I've dipped it in the flux, and I've also turned the cups of the connectors so that they're facing up with a pair of pliers and applied flux paste. First step here is we need to tin everything. Before I do so, I'm going to need to clean my soldering tip. I haven't used it in a couple weeks, so we simply do that with applying solder to it and then cleaning it off with the brass sponge and the wet sponge. Now notice how the soldering tip looks nice and shiny now. I usually like to do it twice for good measure to get the heat transfer as good as possible. Next, I'm going to tin the tip by applying some solder. This allows the heat to transfer to the thing that you're soldering, and I'm going to start by applying it to the end of the cup. Let the cup get nice and hot, and I know it's the right temperature when the solder starts melting into the cup. And I just like to get the cups full enough so that when I place the wire in there, it doesn't spill everywhere. Now you'll notice the solder in the cup is flowing, so now it's the right temperature. That's about the amount I want in there, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Reapply some solder here to get a good heat transfer connection. Let it melt the flux, and we'll start tinning the next one here. Now, it's not ideal to breathe these fumes, so I tend to try and hold my breath when I'm actually applying the solder. Okay, that's enough for that one. Let's move on to the next connector, the XT30. Now, every few connections you're going to need to clean your soldering tip. XT30 is a little smaller, so it's going to go faster. And it doesn't take as much solder to get them tinned. Now that I got my wires secure, I'll continue tinning them. One by one. I like to prep everything ahead of time with the flux, the stripping, the holding the third hand down with some duct tape on my workbench. And the idea is, once you have everything tinned, you heat it back up again, and it should all just melt together and be nice and shiny. Don't have enough solder on the tip there. And the idea is to heat up the wire so that the solder melts when I touch it. Sometimes it doesn't always work perfectly. There we go. Sometimes you got to get it started. Now that we're tinned, it's time to actually make the connection. Before I do so, I'm going to want to put any wire covers or heat shrink over the wires, because once you make the solder connection and you do a good job, you don't want to have to undo it. So we'll start with the big end first. Now on the XT30 it looks kind of weird because I have the male plugged into the female end. That's just in case I heat up the connector too much, it won't move. So let's go ahead and clean our solder tip, get it nice and fresh to make a good connection. Okay, now that we got a clean soldering iron, reapply a tin. You can get a pair of pliers or use your fingers, hold it in position, and just apply the heat on top, and eventually the whole connection will heat up and melt into the cup. I can see that it's flowing right now. Takes a lot of heat to do this on these bigger wires. Okay, now that the wire is fully in there, that's not my best job, but it'll do. Start over here. Now that I got my XT60 female end, I could put the wire cover on. You can see my solder joints are nice and shiny, which is good. Pull check. They're not going anywhere. I got the heat shrink on for the XT30 side. Go ahead and secure the wire, push them together. Get it nice and aligned to make your life as easy as possible. Go ahead and clean my solder tip here, re-tin, and repeat the process. Got a nice shiny end. The wire is all the way into the cup. I stripped a little too much off this side, that's why it's so long there. We could do the same thing with the positive side. I did apply a little more flux. You can never go wrong with too much flux. It helps the solder flow. I should say it helps the solder flow where you want it to flow. Get it nice and hot, make sure everything is liquefied. Take the soldering iron away. Looks good. I'll just put the heat shrink and use my heat gun to shrink it and repeat the step for the next soldering job. Thanks for watching.